All right, ladies and gentlemen, week 16 of the 2024 fantasy football season is kicking off in just a couple hours, which means we are headed straight into the second round of the 2024 fantasy football playoffs. And before you guys set your final lineups, here are 6 things that you need to know before week 16. All right, and let's start off with the fact that Breece Hall is heading into week 16 completely off the injury report. He's actually been off the injury report for about 3 days now. So if you are a Breece Hall owner, you already know this. But throughout the week, and especially in last night's fantasy Q&A stream, I got a lot of questions about what to do with Breece Hall. Still a bit difficult to trust Breece Hall overall, coming off of a decent performance last week on the road against the Jaguars and a good matchup with 13.1 fantasy points, 9 touches on the ground, 30 rushing yards, did have a rushing touchdown, 2 catches off of 2 targets for 21 receiving yards. But really, if you were to take away the rushing touchdown, didn't do a whole lot in this game. And I mean, it was a game script where the Jets were forced to throw the football, which could certainly happen here in week 16. But ultimately, the Jets are also just throwing the football first and foremost before they're running the football, right? But I still think there's some positives here for Breece Hall going into the week. Braylon Allen is still questionable going into the week as he deals with the back injury that he suffered in week 15. And Isaiah Davis is also dealing with a back injury. He's off the injury report. But I think both of those injuries to the RB2 and 3 on this team who have had some production in the past couple of weeks, it does help Breece Hall at the end of the day, right? It's a decent matchup here. The Rams have improved throughout the season against the run, but they still come in kind of right there in the middle, 16th overall against the running back position. So I think Breece Hall, to answer your question, if you're a Breece Hall owner, is a solid start this week. I don't know if the upside's crazy high, but if you're going to roll with Breece Hall, I still think he's a good start here in week 16. I wouldn't be benching him for some of the hot waiver ads this week, like a Kendre Miller or Patrick Taylor. I would just roll with Breece Hall. Remember why he was a first round selection. And although the Jets season is in turmoil and hasn't gone as hoped, I still think Breece Hall is a solid start here in week 16. The matchup's good enough. He did enough last week, and we have some other injuries to the other running backs on this team, so Breece Hall should come through for you guys as a solid start heading into week 16. All right, the next thing that you need to know is that the Detroit Lions defense is completely decimated, and it's been a bit decimated for a few weeks now, but they suffered even more injuries on the defense this past week, and that is going to open up things big time for the Chicago Bears wide receivers going into week 16. Now, the Lions have not been good against the wide receiver position on the season so far. They have improved slightly, actually, but overall, the injuries as of late are not helping this Lions unit whatsoever, and they just gave up 48 points to the Bills this past week, and the week before that, 31 points to the Packers. And the last time that DJ Moore played the Detroit Lions, he had 23.7 fantasy points, which was his 3rd best fantasy performance of the season. 16 targets on that Thanksgiving Day game, 8 receptions, 97 receiving yards, and a touchdown. So I think DJ Moore at home this week is set for another big day. And overall, I think that the Bears offense is actually going to come out and have a pretty decent day at home. Almost feels like a trap game for the Lions, and this Lions defense just left and right, defensive line, linebackers, corners. It is just a completely decimated unit right now. Now, you never know. Some of these backups, practice squad players, whoever it's going to be, could step up here. But I think that Caleb Williams, although he didn't have a great week in week 15, will bounce back at home in week 16. Put together a good day for DJ Moore and company. I also really like Keenan Allen this week. He's been very solid with 20-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 matchups, 4 touchdowns in his last 4 matchups. And I think that DJ Moore, very solid start this week. Very safe floor. Keenan Allen, I don't know if the floor is as safe, but the upside is absolutely there. And I've talked about this since the beginning of the week. I really like these Chicago pass catchers going into the week. DJ Moore, if you own him, I would absolutely start him this week. And I think Keenan Allen is a great flex option this week. And I won't be surprised if DeAndre Swift has a solid day or if Rome Odunze pops up in this game as well. But the 2 players on this Bears team, going up against this beat up or Detroit Lions team, that I absolutely want to start this week are DJ Moore and Keenan Allen here in week 16. All right, next thing that you need to know is that Aiden O'Connell is set to start for the Raiders this weekend, which is going to be a very good thing for Jakobi Meyers at the wide receiver position. This is a great matchup against the Jaguars this week, and Meyers has had double digits in 4 straight games and has overall been pretty dang solid on the season. A little bit of an injury bug there mid-season, some up and down points with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, but since week 8, he's given you double digits in every single game except for one, and that was a tough matchup against the Dolphins, and he's averaged 14 fantasy points per game. Now he's getting the Jaguars here in week 16, or giving up the 30th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Aiden O'Connell has been off the injury report for over a day now. He's going to get the start. It's not going to be Desmond Ridder. And I truly think that Aiden O'Connell gives the best overall ceiling to Jakobi Meyers. So Meyers, if you own him, I know he's one of these guys, you drafted him late, maybe even got him off waivers. You have other players in front of him, but he's going to be as solid of a flex option as you could potentially get here in week 16. And the Aiden O'Connell news is a great thing if you're a Jakobi Meyers owner or a Brock Bowers owner. Both of these players have much better floors and much higher ceilings with Aiden O'Connell at quarterback. So depending on who's on your roster, I would view Jakobi Meyers as an absolute must-start player, one of the safest players that you can start due to matchup, due to what he's done on the season, and the fact that he does get a boost with Aiden O'Connell at quarterback here in week 16. I also love Jakobi Meyers' current line on Underdog for receiving yards, currently sitting at 66.5 receiving yards. He has hit that in 3 of his last 4 games, and he barely missed it this past week with Desmond Ridder at quarterback, and now he has this great matchup against the Jaguars at home with O'Connell at quarterback. So I'm headed straight to Underdog to take the over on Meyers' total receiving yards. Don't forget, all new users who sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH are getting a free NFL Pick'em to use towards Week 16's action. Take your free Pick'em. Take the over on Meyers' receiving yards. Once both of those lines hit, you'll automatically triple your cash entry. And on top of that, as long as you guys sign up on Underdog using promo code THECATCH, that link is down below, Underdog is also going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. All right, next thing that you need to know is that we have some bad weather incoming for the matchup between the Vikings and the Seahawks. This is going to be the worst weather game of the weekend with a 93% chance of rain and cold temperatures, 49 degrees or less throughout the entirety of that game. And that is probably going to, in some way, impact the Vikings and Seahawks players. And one player that I think stands out here is Jordan Addison, because he's been such a great flex option over the past couple weeks with 13 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games and 30 or more fantasy points in 2 of his last 5 games. So got a lot of questions about Jordan Addison. I got a lot of questions about like DK Metcalf this week as well, for example. But I want to talk about Addison because I still think he has a ton of upside going into this matchup. He has moved up to the wide receiver 14 on the season so far, averaging 14.8 fantasy points per game. And like I said, over the past couple of weeks has been absolutely fantastic. I do have concerns about this offense on the road going into this bad weather game. I have some concerns about Sam Darnold. I'm still starting Justin Jefferson if I own him, and I'm probably still starting Aaron Jones if I own him. And I think it's only fair to say that I'm still starting Jordan Addison if I own him as well. It depends on what other flex options you have, and you probably want to view Jordan Addison as a bit of a boomer bust option going into the week. But if you want that upside, he certainly still has the upside going into this matchup. Seattle, okay against opposing wide receivers, okay against the pass, giving up the 18th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So not great. not bad, but I think this could be a big game for Jordan Addison. And there's certainly a world where Sam Darnold comes out here and has one of these 2-3 touchdown passing days in terms of passing touchdowns, right? So I know Darnold's not coming off of the best performance against Chicago, didn't really have to do a whole lot in that game. But nonetheless, I still think that Darnold and company will come out here and have a decent day. And I still think a lot of these Seahawks players, Kenneth Walker, JSN, even Metcalf to a degree, are difficult to bench here in week 16. So you have to ask yourself the question. This is what I always say when bad weather games come up. Does the weather make you nervous or not? Because sometimes we have these bad weather forecasts and then it doesn't impact the game fantasy-wise, like whatsoever. So you just have to ask yourself the question, do you find the weather to be a risk or not? But I will say this week 16 weather report for the Seahawks and the Vikings looks pretty bad, but I would still be willing to risk the upside, depending on your roster, with a player like Jordan Addison going into week 16. Okay, next thing that you need to know is that Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers has been ruled out going into week 16, which I think is a good thing for Jalen McMillan, rookie wide receiver on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who we have talked about a lot throughout the week on the channel. He's moved up to 48% rostered, and you guys know what he's done over the past 2 weeks, 18.5 or more fantasy points in 2 straight games, and kind of tough matchups against the Chargers and the Raiders. You might think about the Raiders and think tough matchup, but you might be surprised when we look at overall rankings. The Raiders have given up the 11th fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, and the Chargers have moved back just a little bit overall. They're actually down to 21st overall against the wide receiver position. So nonetheless, those would be tougher matchups than the Cowboys, who are giving up the 24th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers so far on the season. So I got a lot of questions about McMillan throughout the week, maybe because I've been pretty high on McMillan as a solid flex option this week, but in last night's fantasy Q&A stream, a ton of questions about McMillan left and right, and I think he brings a lot of upside to the table. It's a very solid matchup. I like the game script. I've talked about this throughout the whole week. The Bucs are going to keep their foot on the gas, trying to ensure that they win the NFC South. It's a primetime game, Sunday Night Football. Now we got Cade Otton out, which I do think really positively impacts players like Jalen McMillan and Rachaad White, who are kind of behind the so-called superstars on this team in Bucky Irving and Mike Evans, who should also be in line for very solid games. But if you're in need of a flex option, you don't like what you've got, you need some upside, McMillan is a good start this week. But like I said, a lot of questions about McMillan. I'm not benching players who've given us production all season long. I would trust your studs for the most part. Depends on who you're going to bench for McMillan. But ultimately, this is a player that some of you guys can still run to the waiver wire and pick up going into week 16. And he is as solid of a flex option as you're going to find if you have nothing better moving in to week 16. And the last thing that I want you guys to know is that Tony Pollard's going into week 16 listed as questionable. And at the time I'm recording this, still don't have an update on Pollard. So what are we going to do with Tyjae Spears, the RB2 on this team, who's coming off of a big game against the Cincinnati Bengals with 27.2 fantasy points? Didn't do a whole lot on the ground, but did have a really cool rushing touchdown, but then had 7 targets, 6 catches, 87 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Now here in week 16, he has a great matchup against the Colts, giving up the 24th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So listen, if Tony Pollard is out here in week 16, I think Tyjae Spears is a very solid start. But once again, you got to look at, who are you benching for Spears, all that stuff. One of those weird games. We got Mason Rudolph at quarterback for the Titans. The Titans aren't playing for anything. I don't really, what are they looking for next year? Maybe. It's definitely not Will Levis. Mason Rudolph's set to be a free agent. So they're playing for nothing. They've been eliminated from playoff contention. But I guess you could argue they're playing to try and eliminate the Colts from playoff contention because the Colts are still technically in the playoff race, and these divisional teams want to knock each other out at this point in the season. So the Colts are playing for a lot. They're at home. They're going to have their foot on the gas, doing whatever they can to win this matchup. And the Titans probably going to come out here and try and spoil the Colts' playoffs hopes and dreams, right? So it's a weird matchup, but both of these defenses have not been great as of late. So if Spears is a starting running back, like I said, I think he's a very solid running back due to the matchup, potential game script here, even if it's a bit wonky. But ultimately, if Pollard still is good to go, gets to start as an RB1, I don't know that I want to go chasing last week's points that Tajay Spears scored. I think at that point it's too risky. I think Pollard is a good floor play, but I just don't know if I want to go past that because I still think Spears will get some sort of volume if Pollard's the RB1 here in week 16, but it's still going to be a committee, and I think it just is a little bit too risky for me. But if Pollard is out, Spears is playable this week, but once again, depends on who you're benching, all that stuff. Trust the production on the entirety of the season with the players that you've got. Trust your studs. Look at matchups, all that stuff. But at this point in the season, you want to roll with the players that you drafted and that have gotten you into the fantasy championship or semifinals and potentially to the fantasy championship at this point in the season. So we'll see what happens. Spears, definitely much more startable. Pollard is out. Semi-startable if you're desperate if Pollard plays, but we'll have to pay attention to Tony Pollard's status as we get closer to kickoff here in Week 16. That'll do it for today's video. There are 6 things that you guys need to know before you set your final lineup moving into the second round of the 2024 Fantasy Football Playoffs. As always, guys, I'm answering as many fantasy football questions as I can in the comments section down below. So if you guys need anything moving into week 16, be sure to drop me a comment. I'll get back to you guys as soon as I can. And as always, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out on any of the content, because we're going to have everything you guys could possibly need to help you guys dominate the last week in championship week here in the 2024 fantasy football season. So be sure that you are subscribed so that you don't miss out on any of the videos. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.